Today we're going through all the books that I've read so far this year. This is my first reading wrap-up of 2026, so we have a lot of books to get through. This is not all of them. Some of them were on my Kindle or library books. I think in total there are 12 books that I've read this year so far. We're going through January through April, so I averaged about 3 books a month, which is a lot less than I was reading last year, but lots of life stuff has been going on. It's been good, but busy. I'm finally picking back up the reading. I'm back to doing my monthly TBRs, getting back into doing the wrap-ups. So without further ado, let's start with January. I'm just gonna go through these in chronological order of when I read them, tell you my thoughts on the books, what I liked, what I didn't like, what I rated them, and if I think that you should read them too. I have my reading journal here because I thought this would be an easier way to kind of visualize all of the books that I've read each month before I talk about them. So in January, I read 4 books, these 4 books. I also kind of map out how long I spent reading each book. I write down my average rating for the month, what genres I read. This whole year so far has kind of been a mix of romance, sci-fi, and fantasy. I think maybe mostly fantasy, which has been neat to get back into because I feel like last year I was more into sci-fi, but that's been fun. So I've been reading a lot of longer books because that's what's typical of the fantasy genre, and that's what I've been into lately. But in January, I did put the books I picked for my TBR. If I finished them within that month, I put the star rating on top. I have finished all of these books. I just did not finish all of them in January. But starting with the very first book of 2026 that I read, Shift by Hugh Howey. This is the sequel to Wool, which is the Silo series. It is a science fiction book. There's a TV show about the book, which I watched that first, and I honestly feel like that made me already interested in the books going into them. And then I ended up liking the books even more, even though I did love the TV show so much. So the second book, Shift, it's very interesting. It's the sequel, but it's actually a prequel to the first book. Kind of gives you the background of what's going on and helps you unravel more of these mysteries about why these people were placed to live in this underground silo and told that the world outside is not survivable. The entire time reading the first book, you're trying to kind of figure out if that's true or not. And then in the second book, we see what was going on in the world for this to have basically gone from what modern day is like to this situation. And then the timeline goes all the way up to where we left off at the end of the first book. So I still need to read the third book, Dust, but this book was a 5-star for me. So was the first book, and I imagine that the third book will be the same whenever I do get to that one. If you're into sci-fi, highly recommend that, and also highly recommend the TV show Silo. Next, we have Spark of the Everflame. This is Heat of the Everflame, which is the third book that I'm currently reading. But Spark of the Everflame is the first book in the Kindred's Curse saga, and I loved it. 5 stars, great start to the year, 2 5-stars in a row. This is a young adult romantic series. It's about this fantasy world in which the mortals are segregated from those with magical powers, the Descended. And we follow DM, who is our feisty female main character. She works as a healer. There's a love triangle that I really enjoyed. And you see these dilemmas that she goes through as she's grown up in this mortal world, faced a lot of the hatred from the Descended, so she's come to dislike them. But things are kind of gray. They're not as black and white as they seem. There's not really one good side. There's good and bad people from both. Spark of the Everflame was a very strong start to the series. I later went on to read Glow of the Everflame. I just read that in April. I'm going to talk about that now because I feel like I should just talk about the series together. But I love that book too. 5 stars for Glow of the Everflame. I feel like in the first book, DM could be kind of foolish. She made rash decisions. She could be a little bit frustrating. But in the second book, she grew so much. She really matured. You see the romance continue to develop, and I absolutely love the romance. It's cool to learn about the different regions in their world, the different magical powers, and the friendships and found family in that second book are incredible. It leaves off on a huge cliffhanger that had me immediately going in and reading Heat of the Everflame. So haven't finished this one yet, but currently reading it. This was one of the books that I picked for my May TBR. So if you want to see what other books I'm reading this month, go watch that video. Next up, we have Lights Out by Navessa Allen, and this book was a disappointment for me. I rated this one 2.5 stars. It is a dark romance book, which I've come to realize I don't like that genre as much. I think if it's a fantasy book, then I don't mind. Like dark romantasy, I'm good with that, but just plain old dark romance, I'm not as into. I felt like there was very minimal plot to this book. There were a lot of spice scenes, but I just wasn't really invested in their relationship. I felt pretty bored by the story. There just wasn't as much going on as I was expecting. So really this book just left me kind of disappointed. I was cringing while reading it. I didn't love the writing style. I felt like it was kind of repetitive. There was lots of telling instead of showing. There was one aspect of this story that had a mafia plotline, and I was interested reading that, but it went very surface level, and I wished it had gone deeper into that aspect of the story, because that was the part that I found the most interesting. This is a series of interconnected standalones, and I think one of the other books might go more into that, but I just did not like this book enough to continue the series. So personally, this one just was not for me. The last book I read in January was The Slow Burn by Allie Rosen. This book was so cute. I rated it 4.5 stars. This was the first book I read of 2026, and I absolutely loved it. It's about a chef who is kind of a workaholic, but right at the beginning of the story, her restaurant burns down, and while it's being repaired, she needs to find something else to do with her time. So her best friend's grandma lives in Italy and decides to invite her to come and be a chef in her small shop in this small Italian town that's absolutely adorable, where she meets an olive oil producer, and this romance develops between the two of them that's so sweet. The friendships that she makes while there are also absolutely adorable. I loved how much personal growth and development we witnessed Kit experience while she was in Italy, learning to have work-life balance and just appreciate simplicity in life. We got to see a lot of the culture in this small Italian town, which was so cool and really made me crave a trip to Italy, which is not going to happen anytime soon, but this book almost transported me there. So it's cool to experience that without actually being there, just by reading the story. Even though Kit did come to appreciate simplicity more, that didn't mean that ambitious side of her disappeared. It was still there. Her career was still a priority, and that was just neat to see a true balance between romance, her career, and just enjoying life, having friendships, and finding joy and meaning in other parts of her life too. The only thing I did wish is, with this being a friends to lovers romance, I had hoped to see a little bit more development of them just being friends first before getting into the romance. And there was some of that. I just felt like it was more quickly glossed over. So that's the only reason this was not a 5-star for me, but it came very, very close. This was a beautiful story, highly recommend. On to February. I only read 2 books in February of this year. I did pick a TBR, and only one of the books that I read was from that. So I decided not to do TBRs for March or April because I felt like I just needed to catch up on some books that I'd been wanting to read, mood reading, and with me not reading as much as I had been, it just didn't make sense to have a TBR. But I am glad to be back to doing the TBRs. I was reading very, very slowly. You can see there's a blue line that tracks through the entire month. So it was just taking me a while to get through books. I was reading multiple books at a time. Of the 2 books that I read in February, one I loved, one I did not like. The first of which was A Court of Silver Flames. I rated this book 5 stars. Finally, I was going to say finished the Akatar series, but that's not even true. Sarah J. Maas just announced recently that 2 more books in the series are coming, one at the end of this year and one at the beginning of 2027. But for now, I am all caught up on the Akatar series, finally. I read the rest of this series years ago, loved it, and then I tried to read A Court of Silver Flames and DNF'd it at the time, knowing that if I came back to it later, I would very likely enjoy it, but it just wasn't the right time for me to read it. The rest of the series follows Feyre, and I absolutely loved it. Then when we get to this book, it follows her sister Nesta instead, and it's also told in a different format. It's in a 3rd-person perspective. So just those 2 big shifts I actually did not know going into this book the first time. So I just wasn't as interested. I knew it was a well-written book, and I knew the story would be interesting, but I just wasn't invested because I was expecting something different. I'm glad I did give it a few years before coming back to it because I love Nesta's story. It was so beautiful. The friendships in this book were incredible. The world building, as usual, amazing. Very neat different creatures, incredible plot. I loved learning more about the priestesses. There was also this Hunger Games-esque aspect of the story that was really cool. We have Nesta and the priestesses going through daily training exercises, really building their physical strength, their teamwork. For a lot of this book, I listened to the audiobook while I was at the gym working out, and it was honestly so motivational to be listening to these strong, powerful women training while I was doing the same thing. Of course, the romance in this book was so sweet. I love Nesta and Cassian together. But I do think my favorite aspect of this story was Nesta's friendships with Gwen and Emery. They all kind of had their own traumas in the ways that they opened up to each other and trusted each other. It was just beautiful to see. Love this series. Cannot wait for the next book. I think it comes out in October. The other book I read in February was Collide by Bal Cabra, and this one was a disappointment for me. I rated this 2.5 stars. It is a hockey romance, and it's a college hockey romance. I think I just don't really like romance books set in a college setting. It feels a bit immature for where I'm at in life. I really disliked the main female character in this book. I thought she was very rude, very immature, and that just really impacted my enjoyment of the story. I thought the guy was sweet. I don't think she treated him well, and I just was not invested in their relationship. There was a lot of petty drama, a lot of frustrating decision making on her part. I felt like she had a lot of unreasonable grudges towards many of the characters, and while this book is described as having bickering that turns into bantering in the relationship, I found that more to be that she was just being rude. There were a lot of side characters too, and I had a hard time differentiating all of them, which surprised me because this is the first book in this series. So just didn't love that. I didn't entirely dislike the book, but I did not like it enough to continue the series. On to March. This was a great reading month for me. I averaged 4.5 stars. I read 3 books, all of which I rated 4 stars or above. So absolutely loved all 3 of the next books we're going to talk about. The first of which was an arc. This book made me think of you by Livy Page. It is a romance that also focuses a lot on grief and healing. It is a book for book lovers. It follows Tilly, whose husband passed away, and he collaborated with the owner of a bookshop named Alfie to leave his wife a year of books, with 1 book to be gifted to her every month for the next 12 months to help her through her grief and healing, and along the way she does find a love again. I rated this book 4 stars. I teared up several times while reading this book. I loved Tilly's transformation, how she found community, how she made amends with people in her life. I thought the author did a great job addressing a lot of these important topics. My only complaint really is that some of the months felt a bit repetitive. They kind of blended together or addressed things similarly, but I did enjoy the book. Next, another arc, Across the Vanishing Sky by Catherine Cowles. This is a romantic suspense, and it was so good. 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed this one. This is the second book I've read by this author. Her other book, Secret Haven, was a 5-star read for me, so I have had great success with her books. I haven't read a ton of romantic suspense, but the genre, I love it. I find that if I'm reading just a plain romance on its own, I'm not as interested typically, but if you tie it in with another genre like thriller or fantasy, I'm just so much more intrigued because we often have a really good plot alongside a really good romance, and that can just bring that rating up for me to really be gripping my attention the whole time. This is the first book in her new series, Starlight Grove. It's set in a small town. There are 5 brothers, and this book follows the first brother, Dex, who does appear in her other books. But I was hooked the whole time. Catherine does a really good job drawing you in, making you ask questions, trying to figure out the mystery and what's going on, and never having a clue. I thought I suspected nearly every single person in this story of being suspicious, of potentially being the problem, and I still could not figure out what was going on, which is great. I love being surprised in a book like this. She also did a great job with character development. Like I said, it's the first book in a new series, and every single character, you could feel like you really knew them well. She did a great job building their backstories and just making each of them have personalities through their dialogue and just how they showed up differently in the story. In the end, I would have liked more details about what exactly happened, but I'm guessing that was probably left out to be addressed in the next book. So that was my only complaint. The last book I read in March, I started the Legacy series. I read Reign of Shadows and Endings by Melissa K. Robrich, and I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. I didn't know what to expect going in. Honestly, I was a bit confused by the synopsis on the back of the book. There's just a lot going on. It is a dark romantasy book, and I feel like a lot of aspects of this book I would typically expect to make me not like the book as much, but I loved it. Everything about this book, I liked the writing, I liked the story, I liked the romance. There's kind of multiple love interests, and I was just intrigued the entire book. It's a very long book, and I just still couldn't get enough of it. Typically, I'm not drawn to reading super long books, dark romance, a book written in third person. The series seems to be setting up for it to be a why choose type of book rather than a love triangle. That hasn't really happened yet, but it's definitely hinted at the fact that that'll be the case. And none of those things I minded with this book. None of those things are bad per se. I just find that I typically don't like books that have each of those things or any of those things. But I liked this book. It's about Tessa. She is a fae, and in this world, the legacy are the people who have magic. All of the heirs to the legacy, they have to choose a source to be their power source, and they choose a fae to be in that position. So it's kind of a submissive role. The legacy is their master, and that's where the dark romance comes in. The premise of the book kind of reminded me a lot of Rose and Chains, which I also rated 5 stars. That's another dark romantasy that I read last year and loved. Both that book and this series I didn't find to be particularly dark. That's definitely my personal opinion, because if you go on Goodreads for the reviews of this book, everyone is saying how dark it was and how it's darker than they expected and to be prepared. I don't know why I was not bothered by it. I know I mentioned I don't really like dark romance, but if it's fantasy, I don't mind as much. I don't know, I honestly didn't think this was that dark. I felt like the guy, Theon, he was kind of grumpy, but he wasn't particularly mean to her. She goes on to live with Theon, his best friend, and Theon's brother. So there's kind of these 3 guys, and they're all very nice to her. Theon's the most grumpy, but I feel like they're all looking out for her needs. Obviously it's a dark situation, but there wasn't really anything disturbing to read about, in my opinion. I will say, I have not read dark romance that much, and the first dark romance book that I did read was Haunting Adeline and Hunting Adeline, so I guess with that being my reference point, maybe that's why I don't view this book as that dark. But I don't know. I love the world building. I love the characters. I love the story. I immediately went on to read the next book. So that brings us to April. I read 3 books in April, the first of which was the second book in the Legacy series, Storm of Secrets and Sorrow. I don't have a ton more to add about this book. Pretty much it was just a continuation of the first one, and I absolutely loved it just as much. I rated this book 5 stars. This book did have some new POVs, and we do see the romance develop more. We see Tessa kind of get more independence. You also see her struggle with her mental health, so that is dark to see her be in that place, but I thought this book was great. Next up, We Are Legion, We Are Bob by Dennis E. Taylor. This is the worst book I read this year. I rated this 2 stars. I don't necessarily think this is a bad book. I just don't think it was the right book for me. My husband read this book and loved it. It's a sci-fi book. It's the first book in the Bobiverse series. There's a bunch of books in that series, but I was just so bored reading it, and it is not a long book. It's only about 300 pages, and I struggled to get through it. I don't think I laughed a single time at any of the jokes in this book, and it is a lot of one-liner jokes. So I just did not connect with the humor. I had a hard time keeping track of the timelines because we jump back and forth between a bunch of periods of time. There's time dilation since they're in space. I also had a hard time differentiating the characters. In this book, there basically is one character made into a bunch of different clones of himself. So they do have their own kind of personalities or different variations of the same personality, but I didn't feel invested. Certain aspects of the story I liked, but for the most part, I did not enjoy this book. I will not be continuing this series, but just because I didn't like it does not mean that this is not a book that you would like. Typically I love science fiction, so I just kind of assumed I would like this book, but that was not the case. And then the last book that I read in April was Glow of the Everflame, which we already talked about at the beginning of this video. So those are all 12 books that I've read so far this year. Here's a nice spread in my reading journal that displays all 12 of the books together with their pictures, what I rated them. I absolutely love having a reading journal and visually displaying everything like this. I think it makes it so fun to keep track of all the books that I've read in this way. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. I'm so curious to hear if you had the same opinions that I did, or if you had a completely different take on any of these books. But thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video.